My name is Crystal Colson, and I'm here to tell you about my very traumatic childhood that really I felt very unloved, but I want everyone to know that there is definitely a turn around the corner and there can be happiness at the end of it. I grew up in a very tumultuous home. My mother and my father were there for most of it. My mom was there about until I was maybe 13 or 14. She was a very angry person, very violent, would lock me in my room or just throw things, break my things. My father sexually abused me for most of my childhood. I mean, I don't really know when it started, but there was a lot of grooming, so I'm not really sure when it started, but it ended at about 15, 16. I really grew up feeling that I didn't get as much love as I needed. I always say it's kind of like a waste of 22 years. So I did have an older brother. He was about 2 years older than me, but unfortunately he had some mental issues. I'm not 100% sure what they were, and my parents thought that it would be best to give him up for adoption when I was 2. I don't actually remember him, but I did meet him when I was 18, and his problems were so substantial and tendencies towards violence and stuff that I thought it was just best to maybe not go through any further. I always felt like things weren't right. I was very unhappy at a very young age. I mean, my earliest memory was just like really hating my mother. I didn't really hate my father until I knew what was going on. But yeah, I was always very jealous of seeing like other little girls have their mothers like love them or like, just having good relationships or even just money. Like I grew up really poor. So like even sometimes we wouldn't have lights or food. So I was very jealous of kids, definitely. And I didn't really get along with them either. So it was kind of like nowhere to go, a little bit like very much bullied at school and then coming home to nobody being very nice to me. So it was very hard. I didn't have a whole lot of opportunity while my mother was living with me to have privacy or even a diary I could write in, because I wasn't allowed to have privacy, and whatever I was writing in my diary could be thrown in my face later. So by the time I got into junior high, I didn't handle it well. I had a lot of negative self-thoughts, feeling that I'm just fat and ugly and everybody hates me. And then by the time I got to late junior high and then high school, I started like cutting myself and just like, doing things to just, escape. It was just nowhere to escape, just constant dark cloud that I felt like I really didn't deserve. Why is this happening to me? I'm not a bad person. Like, why everywhere I go is it so awful? I would find any way to find relief. And fortunately, when I got into high school, I kind of dabbled in trying or other kind of drugs, but I was always smart enough to steer clear of those main things that people will get addicted to. Managed to not come out with an addiction, so I'm happy. I just partied a lot, but I could have ended a lot worse, I'm sure. So my mother and I never had a great relationship whatsoever. I would very much compare it to narcissistic abuse. She has very much narcissistic tendencies. She would be like, you're not allowed to date until you're 18. You're not allowed to wear makeup, nail polish. There was a lot, like I couldn't go to dances. I wasn't allowed to go to like overnight field trips. Yeah, everything really had to be how she wanted it. And if it wasn't the way she wanted it, then there was gonna be hell to pay. So she had some violent tendencies. So she would, slap me across the face, hit me, lock me in my room. Actually, I remember distinctly one time I had got her this nice, something for Mother's Day. I got her this nice lamp and I gave it to her, and she ended up just like hucking it across the room and like broke it everywhere. And it's like, clean it up, throw it, make a mess and make me clean it up. Or she would have my father come in my room and just like toss everything in my room around and be like, clean it up. My mother was very scared. I was very scared of her, very, very. And I always found myself having to hide things from her because we didn't have a good relationship. So there was no trust in her, and she certainly didn't trust me, always assuming I was doing something wrong. Some of those rules were so obscene, like not being allowed to wear tampons because that would means I'm not a virgin. Or like certain things, like I couldn't wear colored underwear because it was just such, backwards thinking that doesn't build up a female at all in any way. Very devastating to the female ego or brain. She would not go to church or anything, but she certainly would make everyone believe she was really into God or Jesus. I'm very much an atheist, but forcing me to say my prayers and stuff, and being very covered up. I remember one time I got in such trouble. I was just developing my boobs, and I thought it was funny, and I was just like looking at him in the mirror because I thought it was funny. And she walks in and she goes, "What are you doing?" and freaks out and says, "I am just the worst, and what I'm doing is wrong, and I was playing with myself." And like, she calls my dad and makes a big, that is devastating. It's so hard to figure out when the first incident happened because he was very sneaky about it, and he really played on the fact that I hated my mother. So he would always have little things that we would hide behind her back. And it could have been, maybe even testing me. He'd be like, he'd allow me to do certain things that my mother wouldn't allow me to do if I showed him my boobs, or if I, let him take pictures of me, or like touch my boobs, or like other things. And then I could go to the dance that I really deserved to go to because I was a preteen and I should be allowed to do these social things, or have a boyfriend. My mom would go away for a while cheating or whatever she was doing, and my dad would take that alone time and use it to even give me alcohol when I was 12. I remember having like my first hard alcohol when I was like 14 or 15. So a lot of secrets. These things when I was younger seemed so normal because they were eased into from a young age. So like, I remember distinctly one time he was babysitting me at his work while he was a security guard, and he took me into a closet and had like a tickle fight, and it was dark in there. And these are things where like, I didn't see anything wrong with it, but looking back now, it's like, well, that's very messed up. So no, I didn't know what was going on until I started growing up, passing puberty, and getting boyfriends. When I got a real boyfriend when I was 15, that's when I was kind of like, oh, this isn't normal. Like, you're not supposed to, show your boobs to your dad, like in a joking way, or take pictures. And there were some times that it felt weird because I was just like, okay, this doesn't feel right. Like, why are you taking naked pictures of me? But then like the flashing thing, it was kind of like a jokey thing, right? Like, he learned it from like a radio show. It was called Whip 'em Out Wednesdays. And that's how he started it, where it was like, oh, we're bros, we're friends. It didn't seem weird, I guess, but yeah, very weird. There was a lot of other things too that went on. And it's once I got a boyfriend and it still kept going, that's when I was really like, this is not right. And then I put a stop to anything. And he's even asked me for like a blowjob before, and your father should not ask you for a blowjob. I did not do it, obviously, because I was like, that's f***ed up, but it really sucks. And then it leads into what I accepted in my life in the future. Like that boyfriend that I was with, he ended up beating the out of me, because for me, being with somebody who was abusive was better than going home to a sexually abusive dad. It's like, well, pretty much thought that what I was supposed to accept in life was probably not going to be a great life, but here we go. I had been hardened down so much in life that getting a love from my domestic violence situation, it was like I was still getting love, and maybe it was me. Like, I kept thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have yelled at him and he wouldn't have done this, or he apologized and he'll move on. And it's never like that. Domestic violence, they will always apologize and say they'll do better, but you could never believe them. So one of the things that happened, so I could go to a big concert, he was to watch me have sex for the first time. So he spied on me with my boyfriend, and then, so I can never really take that back, which kind of sucks. I didn't realize until I was 30s that I have complex PTSD. I kind of always knew about the social anxiety, but the complex PTSD, that's basically PTSD when you get repetitive trauma after, and I was basically walking around my whole life ready to explode and all these emotions, and I had no idea why. And now I'm just like, okay. Diagnosis is everything. Once the sexual abuse came to an end, I started avoiding my father as much as I could. I couldn't afford to leave, unfortunately. But I met my now husband at 22, when I was 19. And we moved out when I was 22. But, I think he dealt with a lot of the baggage I had because he came from a very normal life with great parents who loved him. And I was just so full of anger and so full of rage. And when I was 16, that's about when the anger really kicked in. And I would skip school. I dropped out of school, actually, which is a pretty big bummer. But then I was a hairdresser later, and then I did go get my GED and my college degree for a graphic designer. So that's good. I'm glad I did go back. But, it took me that long to get my feet off the ground because I had to go through all of this stuff. And I mean, it affected me so deeply. Like, the depression would get so deep. I was like so lost for a while, and I was drinking a lot, and I was just crying a lot, and I just didn't understand why I was such a mess. I didn't really mentally get off my feet fully until I was about young 30s. I had my first child, and children will really push your buttons. And when he was a baby, I could just, my patience was very low. My anxiety was I was scared of everything for him. And I was getting super angry very easily. And I'm a gentle parenter. So I thought the appropriate thing would be to go to a therapist and figure out, why am I so emotional and just easily triggered? And that's when I told them my whole story, and I realized that I had complex PTSD, and the diagnosis was just everything. It was almost like I have this full math problem in front of me, and now I can just take steps to working on it. And I've worked on it for so long. And I feel like, with the right medication and talk therapy and cognitive therapy, it has really put me in a place where I'm confident, and I have a career, I have children and family, and I feel very lucky because I understand that I could have gone in many different directions that were negative, but I didn't. And I'm also the director of a charity that helps bring food where it needs to go in my community, whether it be like feeding the homeless or feeding people who are just came home from the hospital, whatever. And I just use my pain to try to make people happy, and that happiness kind of gives me some good happy vibes. I was very afraid that I would grow up like my mother because she was so angry, and I was so afraid that I would have a bad relationship with my children as well. But I do have to say, I don't know, I have such a great relationship with my children. They're only 4 and 7, but I make sure that we have an open communication, and I support them, and we gentle parent, and I feel like I've really just killed that generational trauma, and stopped it in its tracks. So with my father, we never really had a conversation about what he did, but he knew. And he had the day that I was moving out, he was like, I probably won't be hearing from you again, will I? And he was actually surprised that my answer was, no, you're not ever going to hear from me again. And I didn't contact him ever again. Now, my mother, that's a little tricky. I tried speaking to her. We can't have a relationship at all. She can't live on her own whatsoever. I don't know, she has this very victim mentality where everyone's out to get her, the world is out to get her, she just never get her own. And I mean, to her, I was just a terrible daughter, and she did the best she could, and I don't know if she's sorry, and I don't think she grasps how much it's affected me, and I don't know if she cares. I'm not getting that vibe, but I don't know. So my father actually passed. He actually had leukemia starting when I was in my teens, and he ended up passing from it after I had moved out. And some of his friends had called me to tell me he was on his deathbed, and I said I didn't care, and I didn't want to give him the last word, and so that was my last word, just letting him die. He couldn't have cared less about my well-being, growing up. He didn't even have food in the house. Once my mom had left, the whole buying food thing stopped. It was just always beer in the house. So I didn't really care about his well-being. It's hard to think about my mom because she's still alive and she's moved closer. There's a part of me that always wants to be loved. It will never happen, but I will never be loved by her. I have a great, system around me now. I'm my mother-in-law, father-in-law, husband, my kids. I have so much love in my life now. I don't really feel like I need it. I felt like I needed it for a long time, but I don't feel like I need it anymore. And I've given her chances. It's sad. It does bother me, but my father, it doesn't bother me. Like, I still have, flashbacks, and I'll still disassociate, and I'll still, it will still bother me that way. But I don't feel bad about any of my partaking, or not being there on his deathbed or anything. My advice to anyone going through any of this kind of stuff is that listen to your soul, that there is something on the other side of the trauma, that it will be better. And even though that you're in it and you feel like you want to die, or you feel like that, like, it's never going to get better, it will absolutely get better. And it's just also tell the police. I regret not telling the police on my ex. I regret not calling the police on my father. Get them in trouble. They deserve it.